Hey guys, this is Cam315 back at it with another video for you guys, and I'm back with another fairy tale arc reviews for you guys. So coming off of the last arc review, which I covered the intro to fairy tale and the Eisenwald arc, um, I'm here to cover the next arc in the series, and that is the Galuna Island arc, or the Deliora arc. And this arc essentially covers the really Natsu and Lucy going on an S-Class quest when they shouldn't be going on it. And this is mostly the arc in the intro of the series where it focuses mostly on Gray and his backstory and his past. So let's talk about this now. Galuna Island, in terms of the first few arcs of the intro to the series for Fairy Tale, it's kind of in the middle for me. I think the thing that makes this arc relevant the most is obviously the fact of just the Gray stuff. Everything kind of other than Gray stuff is kind of just irrelevant. Like Natsu, Lucy, and Urza, they don't really, as I turn off my stupid thing, what is it? There's really not much, they do in this arc other than show up and try to assist the characters. Obviously, they get in the way when it comes into taking down other opponents of obviously the antagonistic side companions. But really, other than that, they kind of do much to near nothing, and they're kind of the support characters for Gray, who is the main character in this representative arc. Now, anyways, as I was saying, essentially the episode that starts off, or the chapter that starts off this arc, is essentially when we see one of the stronger guild people, essentially, I guess you could say one of the three major characters, or one of the three major the three strongest wizards in Fairy Tale enters the fold, and that's Mystigan, who is essentially wrapped up in a lot of cloth and everything, and his face is covered. And when he shows up, he puts on a sleep spell so nobody sees who he is. And essentially, after he leaves, Lucy asks, like, who was that and what was that? And they say, oh, that was Mystigan, and he must have came back from completing his request, which was an S-Class, request. And essentially, the thing with S-Class request is they're essentially tougher, harder requests to do. The only problem is not many people, or not regular guild people in Fairy Tale, can do those requests, because they have to have the title of being an S-Class wizard to be able to do requests of that caliber. Even Master Makarov says you can't go on the second floor of the guild hall unless you're an S-Class wizard, and stuff like that. So essentially, it kind of, now I don't know if this is how it works for all the other guilds, because we don't know if that works. This whole S-Class stuff works for the other ways. It seems like this is only, I guess, exclusive to Fairy Tale, because obviously it shows, oh, how strong are you to be able to complete this quest. But I wouldn't be shocked if there's other guild members, because we see future other guild members that are like literally, wizard saint levels, which are essentially Makarov's level, which are very strong wizards. But the thing here is, because of it, Lucy's wondering, I wonder what S-Class is like. So I guess I have to train up and get strong to be able to do S-Class and things like that. But essentially, from what we're led to believe, the only main people that do S-Class requests are Mystigan, Urza, and we see a little bit later on, Makarov's grandson, Loxus. And at some point in time, when Mara Jane was doing her guild work, and she was a full-time wizard for Fairy Tale, she was an S-Class wizard. But obviously, we know that Mara Jane essentially retired from doing guild work because of the tragic past she had, which I'll bring up probably in the next coming arc, which is the Phantom Lord arc. So essentially what happens is Lucy goes back home, And then Natsu and Happy, like themselves, are in their room, and they essentially, I guess you can say, tempt her into taking the S class request. Essentially, Happy grabbed an S class request for Natsu, and essentially Natsu and Happy are like, hey, come on, let's do that. We can prove to Gramps, we can prove to Makarov that we can do S class, and we're S class level wizards and stuff like that. Now Lucy's not buying into this until she finds out that, guess what? They're going to be giving away a free Celestial Spirit key. And that's when Lucy's hooked on, and she's like, okay, let's go for it. So then the next day, the whole premise of this whole thing is, or before we get there, but essentially, like I said, the next day, Mary Jane tells Makarov, like, yeah, we lost a S-class request. And essentially, that's when Makarov's like, who took it? Loxus goes on to say it was he saw that Happy was around and he took it. And obviously, they see that Natsu, Happy, and Lucy aren't there. So obviously, Makarov tells Loxus to go get them, but Loxus is like, I ain't gonna get them. So that's when Gray offers up and he's like, don't worry, Master Makarov, I'll go get them and bring them right back and stuff like that. So that's what happens. Gray eventually meets up with Natsu and Lucy and Happy, but eventually he gets on board with the whole thing there because guess what? He's kind of goaded on into this whole thing and stuff like that. Now, the person who's doing the boat, after they tell him, like, hey, we're going to Galuna Island, and he's like, Galuna Island, that island's cursed and stuff like that. So that's the whole thing here. And the whole request of the thing is you have these people, when they get to the island, they turn into these demon-like monster-looking creatures at night because in the daytime they look like humans, and the request is that they have to turn them back to normal and things like that. At the same time, you look at the moon's all purple and everything and stuff like that. And two, at the same time, there's these temple where there's this temple where these people are worshiping something, doing this spell, activating this thing called the moon drip. And that's what the people of this village are thinking, that's what's turning them into these beasts, and it's affecting the whole thing. So essentially, what happens is when Natsu, Gray, and Lucy all go to check out the little palace area, they eventually see that, well, guess what? They walk in and they see a monster crystallized in ice, and lo and behold, Gray knows that monster, and that monster is one of the demons from the Book of Zareth named Deliora, which has a huge implication in Gray's past, which we get a flashback to the past, the fact that when Gray was essentially a little boy, the monster Deliora, or the demon Deliora, essentially attacked his home village, killed everybody in his home village, his mom and his dad. And we see later on his master, the person who taught him ice make magic, his master Or, picked him up and took him in as, I guess you could say, one of her own, and stuff like that, or as, I guess, a son or a child to her. But other than that, because of this, it makes Gray kind of disturbed and a little bit upset, and and obviously it's mostly Lucy wondering, like, what's going on, or like, are you okay and everything. But because of this is giving Gray's bad flashback memories, and that's when things get even more crazy, because that's when they run into these other people that seem are over here in the fact, which is Sherry, as I have my notes here, Sherry, Toby, and Yuka. And they overhear them saying that they're trying to release Deliora from, obviously, his ice prison. Now, cutting back to the guild type of things, Master Makarov's wondering why Gray has not brought them back. So that's when he tells Urza, go get them right now and bring them back, because they're going to face a pretty big consequence for their actions. And obviously, we know Urza, she doesn't play around, and she's like, okay, Master, I'm going to go, get them and teach them a lesson and stuff like that. So anyways, what happens next is essentially after some things happen and things like that, it gets to the point where the trio gets to the top of the man, my bad. Gets to the top of the temple, and they see just a group of group of people doing a spell, activating the moon drip to essentially unfreeze Deliora, and that's how they're doing that, essentially breaking him free with the moon drip. But that's when we get introduced to this, I guess, the antagonist, main leader. And he takes his helmet off and he's like, I never thought I'd see you here, Gray. And we see this is Leon, Leon, which essentially is one of Gray's former, I guess you can say, friends he's had in his past slash his former training buddy. And Leon, essentially, I don't know. See, it's not going to be so hard to pronounce it. It's pronounced Leon, but I keep calling him Leon, but it's Leon. But essentially, we find out in the past that Gray and Leon have history because they both trained under Orr. And the whole thing, this entire arc, is the fact that Gray's asking, why are you trying to, bring back the monster that essentially our master fought so hard to sacrifice her life and everything? And the reasoning behind Leon's reasoning is the fact that he wants to prove his strength, that he was stronger than Orr at her prime. And in the same area, he blames Gray for everything that happened to Orr. Because when you go back to the flashback, which it was a nice flashback because you have Gray adopt some of the same things that Orr did. Like one of the things, like his stripping habits, he got that from Orr because Orr would always strip down to her undergarments and everything. And it was funny because you get the flashback scene, she does that for the first time, and Gray's like, only a weirdo would strip down. And then we see him now, he starts doing that too. So they both learn ice make magic under him or under her. And it comes to a point where somebody makes a mention that to Orr that, hey, those boys are going to be good looking, handsome boys when they get older and stuff like that. And obviously Orr is like, oh yeah, of course, but they're troublemakers and everything. So you get to the point where you have Gray, who's kind of a rebellious character, because after Deliora destroyed his village, he swore that he would take down Deliora as a revenge thing. But because young Gray is so built up with rage and anger for what Deliora did, he essentially does the stupid thing, and essentially he's like, I'm already strong enough, I can take Deliora out myself. And he kind of says some things to Orr that's like, I don't even need you. I'm strong enough on my own. Even so, he disregards Orr's, teachings of saying, do not do this because Orr's like, if you leave, I won't let you back in and stuff like that. And obviously Gray's like, well, that's fine by me. Eventually it cuts over to when Gray eventually meets up with Deliora because he overheard it, someone speaking about Deliora showing up somewhere. And essentially, it gets to the point where we find out he's essentially beat down to a pulp. Orr's there and shows up. And we see that Orr, she lost one of her legs in this battle. And she used, I guess, her ice make magic to create an artificial ice leg to be able to stand. And essentially, this is when she sacrifices her life to save Gray and says, I just want you to go back to the point where you're smiling and you're having fun and everything again, and be, a kid that can have the life or be free from his pain that, once tormented him with the Deliora and everything. So what she does is she does this ice spell called Ice Shell, which essentially imprisons your opponent in essentially a case of ice where it's unbreakable, but the only cost to doing this sacrifices the user who does this spell their life. And that's what happens because of this, or sacrifices her life by using Ice Shell, and that's what happens. So when Leon finds out that she did that, Leon gets upset at Gray by saying, "You took away my only motivation, my only thing that I wanted to, overcome in life, and that was overcoming my master and getting stronger than her and stuff like that." And he blames Gray for that. And he's like, "It's your fault that she died and everything and stuff like that." So that's the whole thing where Leon is kind of not good friends with Gray now in the present because he took away his one goal. As he said, his goal was to surpass Orr. And essentially, Leon tells Gray, like, listen, get out of here. This is none of your business and stuff like that. And Gray's telling Leon, like, why are you going to release a monster that can destroy essentially nations? Why do that? To prove how strong you are and things like that. So what happens is, well, guess what? Leon's like, well, guess what? If you're going to get in my way, then I'm just going to have to stop you. And in this arc, we see Leon, he uses his ice make magic, but he only uses his ice make magic with one hand. And Gray makes a mention in this arc, I think multiple times, saying, Orr taught us to use both hands, not one hand. And essentially Leon's like, well, guess what? I can use one hand, which proves that I'm stronger than Orr was at her best. Because of this encapsulates Natsu in an ice that essentially kind of just gridlocks him to doing much near nothing. Lucy is taken away. She ends up fighting the person that I guess is in love with Leon at this point in time, and that is Sherry. Now she has a rat friend or whatever. I don't really know what the name, but essentially that's who Lucy goes up against in this fight. And her fight essentially is just overcoming the fact that essentially Sherry can control essentially her spirits. Like she controls Tauros to attack Lucy and everything. Eventually it gets to the point where Lucy comes up with the idea to use Aquarius. And by using Aquarius, essentially she takes her down and stuff like that. There's another thing that kind of happens, but Lucy takes her down. Again, the fight with Lucy and Sherry is kind of irrelevant and it kind of doesn't mean much of anything. So not to say the fight was boring. I just really personally didn't care about the fight. And Natsu, after he breaks out of his little ice ball little state, he fights Toby and Yuka. And that fight is honestly a waste of time too, because Natsu literally individually one-shots them equally, easily. Now, I believe it's Yuka that gives Natsu a little bit of problems because he has a force field that repels magic. But eventually, Natsu overcomes that and just really beats him down. And yeah, he beats Toby easily because Toby has like this like paralyzed attack of like if you touch his nails or if his nails stab into you, his paralysis is just it takes effects and it's done. But because Toby is so stupid, he actually injects himself with that and he's out for the count. So yeah, that's what happens. Now on Gray's first battle with Leon, he ends up losing to Leon, and they end up retreating and going back to the village. While Natsu, he's just out there on his own because we see eventually comes to the point where Urza meets up with Lucy and Happy at the beach, and essentially that's when they go back to the village. Then when Urza meets up with Gray, essentially Gray tells her like, listen, well, I need to fulfill this request. We need to fulfill this request. Like the people need help here. And Urza, she's like, look, I don't care. You're going back to Fairy Tale. We need to go find Natsu and we're leaving. These people don't need our helps right now and stuff like that. And Officer Gray is like, but Urza, why are you acting like this? And essentially the main reason to why Gray wants to stay and do this is because the whole Deliora stuff going on with Leon and stuff like that. So eventually it gets to the point where Urza eventually is like, okay, fine. But the moment we're done with this, we're going back to Fairy Tale and you guys are having your punishment initiated and stuff like that. So after some time things have passed, we get near to the climax of this arc, and this is when we finally see Natsu confront Leon, and eventually gets to the point where Leon somewhat gets the upper hand on Natsu. Then that's when Gray comes in, and he managed to come in and take charge. But the thing is, Gray's like, well, guess what? If there's one, if you're trying to do it, then I'm just gonna have to do the same thing to prevent that from happening from Deliora's revival and stuff like that. Now, in the meantime, we see that, well, guess what? Deliora is trying to almost being resurrected thanks to Toby doing the ritual to summon the moon drip to do it. But Natsu tries to but Natsu turns the pyramid or the temple on its side thanks to his magic in he manages to do enough to turn the temple or tilt it to where, guess what, the moon drip beam isn't hitting the ice prison, the ice shell prison, and stuff like that. So eventually we see Natsu start fighting this one old guy who's aligned with Leon, who Natsu, as he's smelling this individual, is like, why do you smell like really good, or smell like you have perfume on you, and stuff like that. Now I'll get to the end when we get that whole stuff cleared up. But the thing here is, when Gray tries to do Ice Shell and Leon, Natsu, before even Natsu even fights that old guy to begin with, Natsu makes sure to punch Gray, and he's like, I'm never going to let you sacrifice your life for such a stupid meaning like that. And he reiterates to Gray, saying, like, I'm never going to allow you to do that spell, I shall. Which, by the time you get to the end of the series, it's kind of a full circle thing from this point on. And I like the whole aspect of, even though Natsu does butt heads with Gray, and he knows Gray gets on his head 100% of the time, you know, Natsu knows Gray is his friend, and he doesn't want his friend to sacrifice his life because of something that happened in the past. And he's like, you can handle this another way instead of giving up your life for this. And that's the one thing about Natsu in the first, really this arc, and even in Urza's arc, and a little also bit in Lucy's main arc, of the fact of he's not willing to give up his friends or have his friends sacrifice themselves because he cares about them so much, and stuff like that. So what happens next up is, because of this makes Gray and Leon fight yet again. And the whole thing going on there is essentially gets to the point where Gray's beating him down pretty badly. And because of him beating him down, he essentially tries to almost convince Leon to, like, hey, we don't need to do this no more. Why do this? You know, and things like that. Now, the only problem is the moon drip was, you know, the moon drip process was good enough. And also the old man, he focused the temple to make it focus back on the side to where the moon drip can affect the ice shell prison. And we get to the point where the ice shell prison is broken and Deliora is free. And it looks like he's going to rain terror on everything. Everybody can hear that and everything and stuff like that. But when Natsu eventually comes back, and when Gray and Natsu attack Deliora, essentially what happens is Deliora goes down particularly easy. If not, as it looks like it's about to make an attack, it essentially starts disintegrating. And we find out over time the ice shell did enough damage and essentially took away almost all of Deliora's life force. And essentially the last remaining bits of Deliora's life force was just its screams and stuff like that. And essentially that's when it comes to a shock of Leon saying, like, I wasted all this time doing absolutely nothing. And now my goal can never be achieved because I can't beat Deliora. And essentially that's kind of what happens. And because of it, this is where Leon essentially gives up and he's like, I have no will to fight anymore and stuff like that. So essentially what happens at the end is things are now resolved on the Deliora on the Deliora front. So Gray actually tells Leon and his friends, like, hey, I think you should probably join a guild. I think it might suit you. You can find yourself a new beginning, because I know for me, joining Fairy Tail, it helped me get, you know, my my foot bearings. It helped me get my life back on track. So I think you should do that. But obviously, Yon is like, whatever. I don't really much care. He's kind of gone, and we see one more like appearance by him, and I think one of his friends does mention like maybe a goat would help us. And essentially, Leon kind of agrees with that statement there as well, just kind of in private, he keeps to himself. Now, although the Deliora incident has been taken care of, the moon drip of the people not, or the people of the village not being able to um, essentially take down or, deform or go back to their human forms because they're still into their monster states is still a thing. And that's when Urza's like, okay, I'm going to smash the moon because the moon is also still purple. Well, thanks to Natsu helping Urza out, they managed to destroy the moon. The real moon shows itself. The real regular white moon shows itself. And essentially, you would think the people would turn back to their human forms, but no, they don't. And that's when Urza comes to the conclusion, and she already figured it out from the moment they got there. And essentially, Urza says, you see, the whole thing was the fact that the spell of the moon drip essentially turned the moon or made the moon look like it was purple and stuff like that. And two, because of the moon magic affecting the people, it made them believe that, guess what? They thought they were in reality humans, but in reality, their monster demon-like forms are really their true forms and stuff like that. And that's what happens and everything. So yeah, it was a pretty interesting thing, little side plot there and everything. You get a pretty heartfelt reunion with the one dude who took them on the boat. I think his name was Bobo, and the chief elders reuniting. I think they were like family or something like that. It was nice and everything. And that's kind of where the arc ends. So when essentially their little chief's like, we'll give you money, but no. Urza's like, no, we won't take any money because, hey, it was just all a mix up. Listen, this was never supposed to happen to begin with. We just had some people in our guild take a request that they weren't supposed to be taken and everything and stuff like that. So that whole thing is there. But essentially Urza's like, but don't worry. We'll take your gate key, though, which Lucy is definitely happy, but to Gray and Natsu's dismay, they're not happy about the fact that, well, guess what? Lucy gets something out of nothing while we get really nothing. And essentially, that gate key is the gate key that Lucy gets or shows off in the next arc is the one centaur character. I forgot. I'll have his name. In the next video. But yeah, that's what happens. Natsu, Urza, Gray, and Lucy all head back to Fairy Tail. Now, I don't know if this was in the manga because I watched the anime, but I guess you could say their somewhat punishment was the fact that in a very funny episode, they switched bodies and stuff like that, which was a hilarious filler episode. But yeah, that's kind of where, this arc ends. I thought this arc was a pretty good, nice arc. It definitely was a focus on Gray's character of just, dealing with his past and overcoming something with his past and being able to, have content now that say, now Deliora is fine. And now knowing that he doesn't have to feel guilty or sacrificing her life because she essentially drained the life force out of Deliora. So then guess what? He can have a happy life and everything. And the one thing I do like about the start to the series in Fairy Tail is with a little bit of Natsu when it comes to, the relationship he has with Lizana, and we get that little backstory there, which I'll talk about in the next video. I like how in the series we get an intro to each of the freaking main cast characters in their representations of their own backstory, of their own individual arcs that essentially shape them into the characters they are today, as well as helping them get more development to find a way to get over that troubling experience to where it comes back to hit them from their past. And I do like the fact that they bring that up. They bring these the character arcs of Gray, Lucy, and Urza all up in the beginning to get them an understanding of their characters, understand what happened in each of their backstories, and how they are the characters they are today, and what makes them the characters, and why, even in these backstory, things, these backstories that get brought back to the forefront, we see how it still troubles them today. We saw in the Galuna Island arc how much this troubled Gray, and how much he wanted, how much of a burden was on him to be like, I need to do this to, I guess you can say, to forgive myself for what happened to Or all those years ago and stuff like that. And we see the same kind of thing with Urza, because we see in both representatives of those arcs that they both are willing to sacrifice their lives in those cases, but we see in both of those outcomes, Natsu wasn't willing to let that happen. But when we get to the Tower of Heaven arc, we'll talk about that stuff. But I enjoyed the Galuna Island arc. Again, it's probably, out of the beginning arcs, it's my third favorite arc. But I'm kind of in the middle of how I feel about it, but I still think it's a pretty good arc, nevertheless, because of the Gray aspect and stuff like that. But other than that, guys, if you guys like the video, leave a like. Put in the comment section your thoughts on this video, the Galuna Island arc. What were your thoughts on the Galuna Island arc? Did you like it? Did you hate it? What's your thoughts on Gray's backstory? And again, that's kind of it. But other than that, on the next arc review, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite arcs in the intro to this series, which is the Phantom Lord arc, where we see the Phantom Lord Guild, a dark guild, another dark guild, yes, essentially under the, I guess you can say, under really the orders of Jude Heartfilia. Lucy's father tells them to go retrieve Lucy because he wants her back home. But we'll speak about that next week, or not next week, in the next arc review. So keep up with my arc reviews. Other than that, I'm gonna get over. So hit that subscribe button if you want to get more Fairy Tail arc reviews as I go on with this story. Again, I am rewatching Fairy Tail. I was like, you know what? I might as well redo them and stuff like that, or redo my arc reviews, because I want them to be a little bit more perfect. But other than that, I'm gonna get over. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Until then, guys, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.